I really started covering these companies in the 96 period of time. It was very clear these were groundbreaking technologies, and the people doing it were very young and very ill-informed.
Kara Swisher, podcaster, author, someone who's been covering tech and Silicon Valley since the early 1990s.
Real serious wealth creates real problems for people. They isolate themselves in their wealth. They didn't have any safety thoughts in their brains. They never felt unsafe, and therefore they created systems that were easily abused and easily gamed, and they didn't care.
From Bloomberg Weekend, this is the Mishal Husain Show. Kara Swisher first started watching startups in California as a journalist many years ago, when the idea that these companies would make any money at all was curious and, frankly, entirely unproven. That head start has meant that she's seen the entire trajectory of how Silicon Valley ended up producing companies that are cornerstones of the US economy today and really important to all of our lives. She has known all the key players from Steve Jobs to the present day, and she's built a reputation for being unafraid of what she says to them. Some of them are probably quite afraid of her, not that they'd ever admit it. But she's with us on the Mishal Husain Show to talk about what she's seeing right now and what she thinks is around the corner. So here is Kara Swisher talking to me. Kara, you have seen the story of tech companies up close for so long.
Yes.
As a new year begins, tell us, therefore, what is on your mind and the areas or the people that you think we should be watching for the breakthroughs or the big moments of 2026.
Well, for this coming year, I think a lot of focus will be on whether big tech continues its hegemony, especially influence with Donald Trump. Obviously, the midterms are coming up here, and the tech industry has been running wild in the Trump administration, whether it's crypto, whether it's this recent executive order about AI, which will not hold up in court. But they've gotten what they wanted, and they've seen a huge run up in their stock prices because they're basically running the stock market. So a question of what will happen to valuations, whether there will be an AI bust, I think everyone will be focused in on. It has a lot of echoes to the internet crash, and it happened right after the new year then too, and sort of was a darker winter for tech at that time. So that's one question. The other is IPOs. There's a lot of possible IPOs coming up, whether it's Stripe or OpenAI or SpaceX and things like that, and that could really invigorate the tech system. And where are the valuations of those? But I think probably most people are focusing on whether AI will be a bust, whether it's a bubble.
So you are taking the thought that this could be an AI bubble seriously. You do not think that that's something we should disregard?
No, not at all. Why would you disregard it? You'd be stupid. These build-outs are enormous, and the question is, where's the business behind it and how patient investors are going to be about it. It's not to say that AI isn't important and critical going forward, and it is the industry that is the next iteration or the next Cambrian explosion, but they may be ahead of their skis, right? With these too many data centers, too many back and forth deals. Feels a little round trippy in a lot of ways that are holding each other's valuations up. I think NVIDIA has an outsized role here, the way Cisco did, many in the first internet. So you're going to have to wait and see. If companies so far seem to be buying, and I'm not talking about just non-tech companies think AI is important, there might be a point where they're like, maybe we don't need to spend this much on this technology now to get the savings we need.
And is there something circular that's dangerous for the industry, which is that they need the IPOs to get the investment, to get money flowing in, but the IPOs and going public also puts further pressure on them and greater pressure on them to achieve the returns?
Well, they've done plenty well being private, like these valuations, and they're for sale. You can buy and sell stock, on the private market of these things. I mean, I think the most interesting IPO would be the SpaceX IPO, because I think it's $1.5 trillion. It didn't grow that much last year. I think it went from 13 to 15 billion. I think it's correct. So it didn't grow as much as, say, OpenAI did. But right now, not forever, it's going to own space. I think it's got 90% of the rocket launches here, some crazy number. So that's a separate IPO that's different. The only thing is related to Elon Musk, who also has to drag around Twitter and Grok behind him, and Tesla, of course, which even though the stock has managed to stay afloat, the business is disintegrating, at a very rapid pace.
He provided one of my most memorable, if toughest moments of 2025 when I had a long conversation with him.
I saw it.
Some of this certainly came up
Yeah,
then.
it's pointless to interview him right now. He's not there. He's there to be a troll. It's pointless. He doesn't say anything of any substance. He just makes things up.
And he avoids it most of the time, right? Other than in a very friendly setting.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to get one bigger point before we pivot more into you, which is that, is there a lack of big enough ideas? I mean, Elon Musk has certainly had them, but overall, you have said recently that in a way the industry is below its potential, that people aren't necessarily solving the big problems of our age.
Well, there's a lot of promise with AI, right? I've just finished a documentary about health and AI, not just AI, but longevity. And AI plays a big role in terms of drug discovery. I was just at a lab in the University of Pennsylvania, and they're using it for vaccines. The problem is the Trump administration is cutting money to those places, and so they're all going to Canada. So that's who will benefit from this. But I think there's a lot of promise of where it could go, right, in terms of not just job destruction, but job creation, too, and all kinds of new and fresh ideas getting forward. The question is it fast enough, or is it more of a slow burn the way electricity was? Electricity didn't change everything overnight. And the question is, how do we adapt it? And I don't think we have enough imagination to know right now, because like at the beginning of the internet, when I started covering it in the early 90s, you didn't know there was going to be Uber or Airbnb or, Google. Didn't exist until almost the turn of the century. So we just don't know where this is going, but it's certainly promising. There's no question about it.
Take me back then to your own relationship with the industry, if you like. I was struck by the words in your book where you characterized it as a meet-cute love story that turned sour. Let's do the love story then. Do you remember sending your first email? Do you remember the first key internet moment you had? Yeah,
when I downloaded a Calvin and Hobbes comic collection on a university server. I was at Duke, and I messed up because at the time you didn't have that much speed. And so the person who was running it was at me because I clogged it up. But I was like, I downloaded a book. And he was like, so what? I'm like, so what? Everything can be downloaded. I remember thinking everything that can be digitized would be digitized. And then my imagination took off. Like, what else can be digitized? Well, my entire workplace, when I looked around, and there was still paper there. Like, what's paper doing here? Why do we need paper? Why do we need phones on the desks? Why do we need to be at the desks? Why can't we be on the move? And I was a very early user of cell phones. I was a very early user of a lot of this stuff. And some of it was silly, but most of it, you could see it shifting and changing how we work and live. And so it was really like probably being around when the car or plane was invented, right? Like, wow, like, whoa.
Would I understand you correctly if I say that I think that you loved the products, the technology, the promise of the technology, some of the products, but you weren't convinced by a lot of the people even early on? I think lots of people you're sitting with when you end up moving to Silicon Valley and they're making these big promises, we're going to change the world. Some of them do, a lot of them don't.
Right. I think very early on, one of my first articles, when I was at the Washington Post covering AOL, right, because it was in the area, it was a local company. But when I moved to the Journal, where I really started covering these companies in the 96 period of time, this is 1996, kids, it's way in the last century. But when I started doing that, it was very clear, one, that these were groundbreaking technologies, and number two, the people doing it were very young and very ill-informed. And so what was striking to me, and one of the first stories I did for the Journal was, I think it was the top 10 lies Silicon Valley people have told me since I got here. And one of them was, we're in this together. The other was, we don't care about money. It's all about community. There are no titles here. It was all a lie. They all were very monarchical. They'd have hoodies, but they'd be like cashmere hoodies. There was always such a disconnect. We don't care about those things. And of course, every one of them ended up with a private plane and a private chef. I mean, look, real serious wealth creates real problems for people. They isolate themselves in their wealth, essentially. And so you could see the warping of them right from the get-go, or as it was starting, because they love to tell lies about things. Most of them were harmless at the time, but later not so harmless.
But you would call them lies, not just hype. You would say they were saying things that were not true.
No, they believed it. They were lying to themselves. I had covered other industries, and no one ever, they had an evangelical bent to them, right? I suspect it was probably like this when you had the founders of Hollywood. They started it, and so they really had a real belief system. The finance guys were just like, we're here to make money. I was like, okay, got it. Thank you. Like, essentially, they weren't there to change the world. There was a lot of discussion about changing the world and it was very religious almost. It became increasingly religious. And it's not religion like Catholicism, but it kind of is. It was an ethos and a culture that was really, having studied propaganda for years, it felt a lot like that. I did that at Georgetown, like watching propaganda move. And then when they had the tools of propaganda, which was to weaponize and exploit information, well, then the story changed really quickly.
Who do you mean, Kara, when you say they?
Oh, Zuckerberg. Someone who had built a worldwide network of information, and largely on other people's ideas sometimes, although we give it to him. He's sort of like Bill Gates in that regard, although Bill Gates became a better person, and I have great hopes for Mark Zuckerberg someday. But this sort of idea that it's really good that we let people do whatever they want and give them all the information and there's not going to be a problem. It was a naivete and an ignorance of history, of everything else, and a pretend that it wasn't his fault. I'm sorry I made this gun. I didn't know people would get shot by it. Like, it's not my fault people get shot by my guns. I'm like, but they're designed to shoot people. Like, several different interviews showed that, really, that I did with him over the years. He doesn't speak to me now.
I know you had a couple of exchanges with him that were really striking for different reasons. Yeah. I remember the period in 2011 when the Arab Spring happened. I did a documentary called How Facebook Changed the World. Yeah. I slightly cringe when I think about the title of that now, because at that time, social media we saw it as benign at that time. It was connecting people who were not being connected in other ways. 2016, the US election, it's a different story by then. Right. Which is why I wonder, perhaps it is not all their fault. There is something of the gun argument that the technology was also used in nefarious ways, albeit it obviously always had that potential. The fault would be our regulators who decided to let them do whatever they wanted. They have a product that has a lot of safety issues around it, and they never wanted to address any of it, and nor did anyone force them to. So you could blame citizens, I guess, if we could have risen up against them, and that just doesn't happen. But our legislators never made a move around privacy. I mean, I used to write about this I did an Internet Bill of Rights. Here's 10 things that will not stop innovation and are important for the safety of consumers. You could have seen this stuff coming. Like, it wasn't like it was that hard to understand propaganda. You could just study Hitler, study Mussolini, study any of the autocrats. There's a playbook that's really quite robust over the many centuries of humanity. So I think that they didn't have any safety thoughts in their brains. They never felt unsafe, and therefore they created systems that were easily abused and easily gamed, and they didn't care. Like, if you designed a car with this many lack of safety features, you know what happened to the car industry. They had to put seatbelts in. They had to put airbags in. That's not to decry the car. Some people don't like cars. I happen to. But, I think it's safer with seatbelts and airbags. And I'm sure the people in the car industry would have preferred not to put that in. It's a big cost. So they just didn't care about the consequences. And I've never seen an industry without any regulation whatsoever and have caused us great harm. That's all. I just compare it to other industries. All those other industries would do the same thing. If pharmaceutical companies are allowed to pollute rivers, they certainly would. They have. There's histories of that. Watch Erin Brockovich, they just do it until they can't. How do you think you changed in this period of covering the industry? Did you yourself have massive belief at the beginning? Clearly a lot of enthusiasm because you saw the potential. I love technology. Did you become cynical along the way as you saw some of these characters? I mean, there were others, weren't there, like Steve Jobs? He actually thought about safety. He thought about privacy. He thought about, he was an adult. So when you said it to him, he didn't act like you had, stuck him in an eye with a dry stick. He could have a discussion about it. That's why, I guess it's a low bar. But, every time you say something tough to Mark Zuckerberg, he looks like you killed him. Oh, how dare you say this to me, sir? If you study technology history, electricity had plenty of problems with safety. Every single industry has this tension. It's just that they're the richest people on earth with the most expensive companies, and it's going to be very hard to pull them back, especially because they're being facilitated by a president who openly accepts donations. And I'm using that donations is doing a lot of work there. Who was part of the system. They've made $5 billion, the Trumps, in cryptocurrency over the past couple of months. That's pretty good. When you lived in Silicon Valley, which you did for a long time, and your former wife was at Google, you socialized with the founders. No. You were at the same parties?
There were a lot of work parties. Yes, they weren't my friends. I mean, maybe one or two became friends, but I can't think of, well, way lower down. But we didn't hang out and, massage each other's feet or anything. But I knew them really well, and they were accessible, and then they weren't, obviously, a lot of them. Some of them were, some of them weren't. I worked for the Wall Street Journal by this time, so they really wanted to know me because they were building their businesses, and the more they could interact. At the time, the Journal could make, like Walt Mossberg could make or break products, right? If he said, I didn't like this, I did like this. I was under no illusion that they were my friends, though, I have to say, and nor did I want them to be.
He was a legendary columnist who was also a mentor to you, and you worked together.
A partner with me. Right, exactly. So when you think about the change, I just interviewed Sam Harris. The tech guys loved him. I would say he has not changed. They have changed, and he is calling them out now. Like, Sam Harris was all mobbed up with those people. I mean, they liked him. They liked his work. And he just kept saying, what you're doing is incomprehensible and heinous. And then they got mad at him for being normally critical, which is what he was of everything. Same thing with Yuval Harari, who wrote Sapiens. They couldn't get enough of Sapiens and Yuval Harari. Then he wrote a book that said these information systems are not unlike the propaganda from the Middle Ages that killed a lot of women. And then they're like, what are you talking about? So I don't think Yuval, myself, or Sam have changed. They have changed.
There does seem to be a common thread of being very thin-skinned.
Yes. Well, you got the big one. You got Elon.
But you did think he was different, I think, early
I did,
on.
and he was. Let me say, I feel like that's the one I got wrong, completely wrong. Not completely wrong, no. Because, look, what Tesla did was astonishing. Same thing with SpaceX. He was the earliest person I talked to artificial intelligence. Now, it's been around. Artificial intelligence has been around from the 50s, but he was the first person to talk about the importance and danger of it. First person I talked to about it in Silicon Valley. So until his most recent personal toils, which I think have been well reported, I think he had a vision that was big. And then who knows what happened? The hatefulness, the obsession with trans people, the drug use, everything else just got out of, I don't know. Howard Hughes comes to mind when I think of him.
So let's go more into then politics and the relationship with the president. Is that political expediency? Is it a version of, okay, it doesn't take just a donation now, you've got to show up to the inauguration, You've got to sit round the table while the president talks about you. Is it expediency the way tech has behaved, or is it a fundamental belief that Trump is good for business?
Both. I would say both. I think they don't mind doing it. They kind of like it because they don't like being insulted by the press. The press is such mean to me. Like, when they say mean to me, I'm sort of like, are you 12? Like, I'm asking critical questions. So what? Wake up. Like, I think one of the things is they get to do what they want when they want to do it. They're a little like, I want it now, like from Willy Wonka, if you remember, Veruca Salt. It's like a bunch of Veruca Salt. I want that squirrel right now who tests the nuts or whatever. They just want it now, and they want it, and so they're willing to stand there. Now, a lot of them do think the Biden administration wasn't as pro-tech, and they have some argument to be made, but the reaction is a massive overreaction, right? I didn't get invited to the White House. Oh, really? Like, that was Elon's entire shift to Trump, was I didn't get invited to some stupid car summit that the Biden administration had. I mean, really, he went on and on about that. That's the last bunch of communications we had. I was like, calm the down, dude. Like, what's the deal? But I get it. It was an overreaction. But then they saw someone willing to take their money in a more explicit way, either through cryptocurrency or sweetheart deals. I mean, Tim Cook, Steve Jobs would have died, would never have brought Donald Trump a golden statue, not on any planet Earth that I would know of. He would be happy to talk to him. Steve often engaged with people he didn't like or he had difficulty with, like Rupert Murdoch, and he talked a lot because he was hoping to shift him a little bit in some way. But the idea that you could bring someone a gold statue and then get a tariff break, I mean, they'll do it. I wouldn't do it. Maybe you wouldn't do it, but they'll do it because they think shareholders win overall. And so I'm not surprised by any of it.
How much of what's happening now do you think is about the influence of Peter Thiel, who was in a pro-Trump position for a much longer time?
He always was.
Yeah.
Not even before that. He was conservative for a long time. No shift from him. He's the same.
But is it partly his influence behind the scenes or the people he's helped bring up, like J.D. Vance, for example? Is there a link from that to the roots of the political
Vance is an
connection?
unusual character because he was so anti-Trump. I was in the presence of him where he was insulting Trump so much one time. I said, you know what? He does have some good characteristics. If I'm the one saying, don't be so mean to Trump, it's like something's awry.
What year was that? Do you remember?
Oh, when he was working for Steve Case, I think, years ago. He was in tech. He's a different character, who I just don't understand in any way. I do in some ways, given his background. But I think one of the things that's interesting about them all is that they have become like Peter was always like that. And if you read his old books, it's not unsimilar to what he did in college. He did some, very conservative from the get-go. A couple of them were also conservative, I would say. Some of them, I didn't even know what their politics. Mark Andreessen, I had no idea what his politics was. He dabbled wherever his interest was. Some of them are just doing it for expediency. I would say Tim Cook, he doesn't want tariffs, so he'll do what it takes. He'll do the minimum, but he'll do it. Or Sam Altman. I think the problem is when anyone gets in their way and then someone gets out of their way, they like the person who gets out of their way more than they should. And I guess if that's your only value, sure.
You mentioned Sam Altman. I wonder whether you see anything different in the younger generation of tech leaders. I talked to Mustafa Suleyman of Microsoft the other day, who is
He's really smart
and resolute about AI needs to serve humans. And does that give you some hope for the future of the industry? Is Sam Altman in the same sort of category?
I don't know, because Sam Altman has also exhibited a lot of stuff that's troubling, like the same stuff, right? And I like Sam personally. And he certainly does respond, but he's going to do anything it takes to make OpenAI win. He's incredibly aggressive. And so, he's in a jam because Google has decided to be Google again and is really coming on hard with Gemini. And OpenAI, what I always say, and I think he hates it every time I say it, but is OpenAI Netscape or Google? Which one? Because that Netscape, which was started by Mark Andreessen and others, really was it until it wasn't, right? Until Microsoft came and mowed them down. And so that may be happening to OpenAI right now, even though it's the most popular by far. These things, the planes are covered with the bodies of tech pioneers.
Isn't it, Kara, because the industry moves towards dominance, right? There was a time when there were so many browsers, and now that is largely Google Chrome's market.
There's also the cost now. The cost of starting, you couldn't have started an Uber now. It would have been owned by Google. Jeff Bezos would not have been able to start Amazon today because the cost with the compute power, it's just so money losing. I mean, internet companies used to lose money and then some of them made money, but now they really lose money. Like it's trillions of dollars. It's kind of... You sit there and you're like, whoa, they lost that much every quarter and they're still doing it. And the question is, if you're saying someday we're going to get to California and own California, that's a good thing. So let's spend anything it takes to get there. But only a few of them are going to get there. That's the thing. And then they're going to be so big that we won't be able to control them, which we already can't, actually.
I do have a very clear memory of interviewing Jeff Bezos in 2000 or 2001.
You're right, when he was
They were
friendly.
selling books, they were doing well. And he said, I'm going to make Amazon a portal where you can buy anything on it. And I sort of did not visible, but sort of the equivalent of an eye roll thinking, I just can't see that day. Well, anyway, he knew, I didn't. But the point about dominance, do you think that it's unlikely that there will be a world where there's a market for ChatGPT and Claude and Google Gemini and Microsoft Copilot?
No. They do the same thing.
Does only one of those four survive ultimately?
Yeah, they do the same thing. They're not that different. I think what'll be interesting is the LLMs that are specific to industries, right? If you create your own. Like I was just on a portal, I'm working on this medical documentary that a company has of my medical information, which I can't believe I let them have it, but there it is. And it's actually very helpful. It's more helpful than the doctor. And it's accurate because it's based on my information and available scientific information, which is mostly, they're using LLMs that are true, right? They're very selective in terms of the information they download into it. And so once you start using this stuff on a one that works and isn't hallucinating and isn't too solicitous, it's like Google on steroids, right? A really helpful Google.
Which one do you use?
I use ChatGPT, but I try them all. I think Claude is quite good. You sort of start to get in the usage of something like you did with Google, and then you don't go. At one point, Microsoft's search engine was quite good. It just didn't use it. because I use the other one, right? I use Google. So I think you get into a habit. And that's the hope of ChatGPT, is they can stay ahead enough in order to, but it's hard to beat Google at being Google, right? I don't know. It seems like they've got all the cards, including YouTube and some other businesses.
What about spatial intelligence? Is there a lot of focus on large language models, and many of us miss this other dimension? Fei-Fei Li was, obviously, she really believes in that.
She's great. I love her. She's amazing. She was one of the early people I talked to about, too, because she was doing ImageNet. But I think a lot of people aren't paying attention to robotics as much. If I had to say one thing I'm going to pay a lot of attention to this year, it's robotics all throughout the world. And the thing is, unfortunately, Elon has hijacked this with his stupid robots, that have to run. And you don't want a robot to run. You want a robot to walk the dog, but does it have to look like a human? No, it could be a box. You have to be more creative in how robots are going to enter our lives in ways that are not as if we're on Lost in Space and, warning Will Robbins. That's how our conception is, our popular conception, that it has to look like us. It doesn't. And so I think years ago I went to an Amazon warehouse, and they had just bought a company called Kiva. And I thought, oh, wow, they're a logistics company now. They're a robot company. Because these little Kiva robots were moving all these things around and then putting them in the most unlikely ways. But it was all mathematical, like why there was shampoo next to a book by Sheryl Sandberg next to this. But it knew, I didn't, a human couldn't do it, but it did. And it was so much more efficient. And I thought, oh, they were trying to show me how many people were in their warehouses, and I'm like, you're not going to need any people here. I could see the day of no people. And they're like, no, that's not true. And I'm like, oh, totally. You're going to go for no people, right? That's where you're headed. And so I'm fascinated with robotics and replacing just almost everything.
You mentioned Sheryl Sandberg, which reminded me that you...
Remember her?
Yeah. Well, I wonder how you see her now, because I know that you had conversations with her about, she was obviously one of the few women in tech and really prominent, and she wrote Lean In. And then in Sarah Wynne Williams's recent book, Careless People, there's a very different picture that emerges of how supportive or otherwise the company really was of women having a family. Sarah Wynne Williams is off on long business trips while she's still breastfeeding and being told that the answer to being a working mother is to get a Filipino nanny.
Well, it'll be interesting historically. I had a lot of sympathy for Sheryl, and then I didn't, I guess. As you say, some of the stories in the book weren't exactly right, but I do agree with the careless people idea, is that Sheryl and Mark were careless people, and they didn't seem to care about, they would do this a lot, like, oh, don't worry about it. And I'd be like, I'm worried about Russians and bot farms, and I'm worried about information being queered up so that we don't understand anything. And I'm worried about propaganda. And they'd be like, oh, don't worry about it. And that was the famous interview I had with Mark, where he said, Holocaust deniers don't mean to lie. It was so striking for that level of ignorance to be at the head of this company. I think Sheryl did go along with him. She went along to get along, right? And I think a lot of people place the blame on her, and I would put it on him more than her. But she was certainly right next to him doing these things, and certainly could have mitigated it, or maybe she couldn't. Right? I don't know. I wasn't there, but she certainly could have left and said something, but she didn't. So,
do you think you learned from your time in Silicon Valley in terms of the startup mindset? Because you've had a really successful business of your own.
I still am.
Yeah, early adopter of podcasts, and you've owned that space and events. What did it teach you that you took away?
I think I was probably like that before, because I was always a difficult employee. People would tell me things and I'd be like, oh, you're such an idiot. You've been in that situation, I'm sure, right? You're such an idiot. Except I started to say it, right? I was like, oh, geez, did that just come out of my mouth to an older white man? Oh, well, too bad. And so I just decided I was better on my own to make or break it for myself. And I actually turned out I had some good business sense of what audience wanted. I also do think I was, as I was early to cell phones or using the internet or using email. I think I was one of the first people at the Washington Post to put an email on my stories because I wanted to hear from readers, which the other writers like, why do you want to hear from them? I'm like, I don't know, maybe they're smart or something. But I was willing to do that stuff. And so I had already had a risk profile that was probably higher than other people. And then I think I really did see the coming destruction of media as I started to cover the internet. We had a classified business at the Washington Post, and it was expensive. The people were rude that took the ads, and it didn't work. And that was one of the big pillars. And I was like, the internet, the digital age is going to change this so easily. It's going to bring down the prices. You don't have to talk to anyone, and it works, and it doesn't cost anything. Like, it was so obvious to me at the time. And I kept having those moments. Like, there was a teletype machine at the Washington Post that I wanted to knock over. I was like, what is this doing here? And they're like, just leave it alone. I'm like, but we shouldn't be getting everything from paper. We should be getting it on the internet. It went on and on like that. And then I realized I was a nuisance. And I think probably I learned being a nuisance is a positive thing from this. It's okay if you're a nuisance. And, in a lot of ways, Jeff Bezos was a nuisance. And I mean that as a compliment, not today, but back then. Why are we doing it like this? And I think I got the courage to do that, and then could see the coming decimation of media. So I wanted to be on my own. But I also saw ways to make money, too. Like, it didn't have to be a doom story of media. You could control it your own way. And so I just kept shifting, and that's what I do.
And we have the word podcasting from the iPod and Steve Jobs.
Yes, the iPod and broadcasting.
Which is obvious when you say it.
Pods. I remember him saying it. I don't think he was the one that actually did it, but he said pods, broadcasting, pods, broadcast. And I was like, oh, I was sitting there. I was like, yes, of course. I got interested in that because the relationship between myself and my phone got rather intimate. And I thought, oh, if you're listening to people on these things, you have a parasocial relationship, which I think I do with my listeners, in a lot of ways. And I just liked it better. And I remember being in a subway in San Francisco, and I usually had always a white tech guy coming up to me, or occasionally a group of Indians or Chinese tech guys. They're all tech guys, right? Tech guys were always my fans. And they'd come up and say, oh, how is Walt, or whatever they would say. I had a group of young African-American women come up to me after I started doing my podcast. And it was over YouTube. It wasn't over YouTube, but whatever. It was over Apple and Spotify, I guess. And they said, we love this, and we love when you did this, and we love when you said that to that guy. And they had started a business. They were entrepreneurs. I think it was a nail business, but for women of color. And they were telling me all about their business. And, oh, we liked when we learned that. And I said, oh, are you reading my website? And they go, website? Do you have a website? They listen to the podcast. And I thought, oh, it's over. I'm going to just do podcasting.
So you realized at that moment you were reaching this whole other group of people who...
It was, but it was a real relationship. Like, I finally had reached the reader. There's a lot of top down with media rather than on the same level. I like my audience.
So can I cheekily ask you for some advice then? I'm the opposite of the early adopter because I've spent most of my career in broadcasting and now I'm in this space. What should I do?
One, make something that is useful to people. And I don't mean like, here's a list of 10 like quiches you should make. Maybe you do that. I don't know. But something it has to be useful to people. The second thing, it has to be interesting. And it could be funny, it could be mind-blowing, whatever. It has to be interesting. And the third is, you can't get it anywhere else. Like, it can't be copied by AI, it can't be copied by anything. If you have those three things, you tend to do really, really well. But figure out what you really love to do all day. And if it happens to be in a broadcast setting, you do have to be in a studio. But this is in my house right now. I have a teleprompter. This cost me a couple $1,000s to set up. I got nice lights over here. So do I need CNN or / whatever? Do I need a studio? Not really. I could do a broadcast from here. I think I will. I'll be Walter Cronkite. This is now.
As long as there is still an audience for any of that, as I think we've established through this. Yes, I love what I'm doing.
That interview with Elon, I really was admiring of it. I was like, well done. You weren't going to win, but well done.
I survived. Maybe that's the most important thing.
You know what? He's impervious. It doesn't matter. You can't talk to you can't do a good interview with a toxic narcissist. You can't. Like Donald Trump, you can't do one. It's impossible. What are you going to do? Wrestle him to the ground? I mean, seriously.
Does he ever reach out to you these days?
Elon? No. At some point, I bet he will. Maybe not.
Let me end where we began, Kara, and to say a new year. How about you in this new year? Do you have a New Year's resolution? Do you do such things?
No, I don't. One year someone said, what's your New Year's resolution? I said, I hope it rains more. And they're like, that's not a resolution. I'm like, no, I like rain and it's good for the earth and I hope it doesn't rain too much. And they're like, that's a bad resolution. I'm like, I think it's a great resolution. I like being in the rain. So why wouldn't I want more of that? But I'm spending, like, I've just finished this documentary series for CNN, and I'm more interested in the topic, which is longevity and the uses of tech to keep everybody healthy, not just the rich people. I think we're at a cusp of really saving a lot of lives from cancer and stuff like that, and including mental health. So I think I'm going to start talking about the possibilities and the life after Trump, life after this ugly, nasty period, which has been fueled by social media, absolutely been fueled. And let's leave that behind. I'm kind of in the KPop Demon Hunters zone right now because I have I have big children and small children. But you listen to it. Go see that movie. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
You need to. Look at me. You got to go see K-pop. There's something in the spirit of that movie, and I believe in cultural shifts and people cultural affecting society, and that's what that movie is about, actually, in a broad sense, because the characters are trying to create a golden dome over people. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful spirit, and I hope we move into that spirit. That's where I'm going to focus. I'm going to focus on the things we can do to improve people's lives, versus arguing with people who could care less about people.
Kara Swisher, Happy New Year. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you. You too.